In this short video, a deeper dive into Perusall Q A, our facilitator Shawn Hill takes questions and provides answers to the participants. After completing this video, you should be able to critique the effectiveness of Perusall from a variety of perspectives, identify ways to use Perusall in your teaching and learning context, and brainstorm alternatives to Perusall that might better suit your needs. Shawn, there are a couple of questions in the chat about...
Sure.
So I can know as the instructor what day of the week and time of day that any individual student is engaging with the material. Is that right?
No, I get an overview. If that is in reference to the heat map, I simply see this anonymized graph here, visualization, which will simply tell me 2.67% of annotations occurred at this time, and 5.9% occurred then. But no, it will not show me when the student did that annotation.
You can see the individual viewing time for students, as in length of time that they spent.
Yes.
With the content?
Yes. Before I go to that, let me just show you. If I do go to all of the comments, so I'm going to look at all comments here. I'm going to change this to 100 entries, for example, and I wanted to go down. I could just randomly choose this one from Glenn. It looks like Glenn did it at 8:30 in the morning. So I can see what time he did that annotation. Yes. Now, to go to the other, I'm sorry, the second question was, Steve?
Well, I think the chat had to do with, data and so on. And there may be some concerns about knowing like how long students are engaging with the text, for how many minutes, how many comments they're making, when they're making those comments, and so on.
Exactly. So I think Perusall can be a very uncomfortable space for many instructors and many students. I think because it is so data-driven and data-rich and tracks so many aspects of the student's engagement with the text. We traditionally, of course, are used to getting a book off a shelf, reading it on our own, perhaps annotating or not. And your experience with the text is an intensely personal one. Perusall, I think, is a tool that you can use as a point of discussion with your students about this issue of surveillance. When you think about Fordham's plans for the fall, for example, I think we can all think of a number of surveillance or surveillance-like procedures that the university is considering for all of us in terms of when we next physically enter campus. I think when we think about the world of work in the 21st century, for many of these students who will be leaving Fordham in a year or two or four, the kind of world that they will enter when the facial recognition is used by corporations, data processing, work evaluation based on time spent, etc. I think these are hugely important issues and ones that many faculty have chosen to bring up and talk to students about. The evaluation itself, as I said, can be turned on or off. But to be honest, if this analytical dashboard is something that makes you as an instructor uncomfortable and you don't want to engage with, then Perusall is really not the right tool for you. What Perusall can do beyond me reading my text by myself in my room is it can create community asynchronously. So I may read the text on Thursday, somebody may read the text on Friday, somebody will read it on Saturday morning, and we can all talk to one another about the text asynchronously and before the next class. And that is something which is extremely powerful and something that is not able to be done unless we had reading groups where students physically met and chatted about something. But it's something that traditionally has not occurred in most of our experience with text. So there are definite issues of data collection here. Note that this data is part of the Fordham Blackboard ecosystem, so it's not on a third-party server, but it is something to definitely consider and to think about.
A couple of questions. One was upvoted, so I need to address this one. Can I use Perusall for image annotation?
Yes. So if I go to an image like this, you may have noticed up at the top there is the option to annotate text, and there's the option to annotate figure, text and figure. If I'm annotating text, I can highlight, for example, words that are on the, whoops, I'm sorry, I hit that. Words that are on the page. If, on the other hand, I choose to annotate using this annotate figure, I can then draw a pink rectangle around a particular aspect of that image and say, you know, this is a microphone.
That is very cool.
Blah, blah, blah. So the students can toggle back and forth. I have had instructors in the art history program use it so that students annotate images of sculpture, for example, images of architecture or paintings themselves. It is also possible and has been used by Gabelli faculty when they have articles which are particularly graphic rich. So students can highlight a particular aspect of a graph. For example, if this was in my class, I might want to highlight, you know, this little section of that and say, you know, here we can see blah, blah, blah. So it's great for people whose articles include images or purely images. Perusall can take on both as well as pure text.
So just a couple more. Thanks very much, Shawn. Does Perusall have a smartphone application?
No.
Are there, because Perusall is web-based, do students need a certain computing power on their device?
No, students, I have not run into that as a problem. The main problem has been students on Mac computers that have been trying to use Safari, and it's very glitchy. We do not recommend Safari as a browser.
So would your sense be that, a couple of things now, do I need to create assignments, and is there any way to have students engage with the text without producing all of that data?
No.
Okay, because I know personally I would never look at it. I'm not that kind of a person. Those numbers don't really make sense to me. But
right.
So would you say that Perusall works best with smaller classes? Have you seen it with, you know, a typical 35 student class?
So that's a great question. Perusall as an organization, as a company, recommends a breakdown of around 20 students. I have found anywhere from maybe 12 students to 20 students as a group is a good size number for annotations. My experience with under 10 has been that it's a little few and far between. And when you get more than, 17, 18 students, the annotations can sometimes get so dense that you almost kind of can't see what's going on. You'll notice there is a tab here for students. You can find out more about them. But under settings, you are able, under grouping, to decide that, for example, you would like a Perusall to break down the students into groups of 20 or groups of 12 or 10 or whatever the case may be. So if you have a large class of 35, for example, I would probably change, the enrollment estimate to be 35 and say my target, should be 18 or something like that in order to have two groups. Every reading will scramble the students, so the students will have a different 17 students that they're engaging with. It's also important to know that if you set up two groups, for example, Group A will not see the annotations of Group B. Group B will not see the annotations of Group A, but you as the instructor will have access to that.
So a couple of things. Can I control the assignments of who goes into which group?
Yes.
And
You could do that by clicking this button right here, Steve, where it says manually assign students. And this is where I would choose to put Andrew in group 2 and to put Jane in group 1, for example.
a couple of other questions. In terms of the grading, is the grading scheme built into Perusall, or can I sort of fool around with the grading scheme? And are those grades integrated into the Blackboard gradebook?
Yes to both counts. So I can, for example, decide that Andrew, I'm sorry, you're just first in the alphabet here. I could decide that I would like Albin's grade to be 3, and I can manually override anything here that I would like. So you can manually override grades. You can delete particular grades if you wish. You can change anything that you want within that schema. Yes, these grades are then transferred to Blackboard's gradebook. So if you are a user of Blackboard's gradebook, yes, these grades transfer there automatically. Again, if you want to have the grading system, it's there. If you want to have it turned off, it's easy to do so, and I can help you do that.
So there are two questions related to book chapters and
Yes.
copyright. So I understand that Perusall has sort of its own library, but would I get into trouble if I photocopied a book chapter and just uploaded it to Perusall?
In general, that is a question that I would put to a librarian. We have a librarian or two that are well-versed in copyright and much better than I am on it, but much more knowledgeable than I am on it. In general, the rules that we follow are, is it limited in duration? In other words, is it just for one semester? Check. Is it limited access? Just to my students? Check. Is it limited quantity? Just one chapter or just a couple of pages, not the entire novel? Check. And is it for educational purposes? Check. So in general, if you have been assigning that work in the past, you probably can use it here. Perusall makes itself available to Fordham for free. The way in which Perusall makes money is when you are assigning a document, if you choose to add a textbook, Perusall claims to have, I don't know, 200,000 books within its library, but you can search by publisher, find a particular text, and you can also request that a publisher and a certain book be made available within the Perusall ecosystem. In that case, your students would pay for a digital copy of that work, whether it's a textbook or whether it's a novel, and it would be available to them as an electronic form that they would use Perusall with.
So is Perusall a static environment? And by that I mean, can I embed links or link out from Perusall to something else?
You could, as the instructor, for example, put a link into a comment, for example, and easily link out. So the answer is yes.
And students can also make, oh, thank you. I think, Mickey, that answered your question. I hope so. If I didn't quite get it right, please unmute yourself and ask.
So Steve, I've just highlighted a section here. You'll see that that's in pink. I'm just going to write a link. And then what I would do is I would come up to this icon to insert a link for the students to go off on. I could also insert a video at this point. And students could do this as well. They could add an image. I noticed people were putting the book cover for The Street up. And I hadn't mentioned this earlier on, but it is also possible for your students to post anonymously. That means that they are anonymous to their peers. You, as the instructor, will always know who has said what, but they, if they choose to post anonymously, will not know who among them has made that particularly perhaps controversial or personal or revealing comment.
Steve and Shawn, I still have a quick question about that. So on that image that you're on right now, if you look at the icon next to the right of the smiley face, you see the icon for embed or insert code snippet. So I was trying to embed code snippet from the Google Ngram site. I did a quick search on Wounded Warrior to see where it first appears in that data.
Yeah, I read that annotation. Thank you very much. And the image was great to see, by the way. Anyway, sorry.
But yeah, and I could do a screenshot and insert the image, but this embed code function didn't work. You saw what it did, right? It makes a big mess. So it just doesn't work, or did I do it wrong? I chose HTML, and that's the kind of code that's on Google Ngram. So I was just curious about that, because I would love to be able to do that with etymology of terms in some sociology texts.
That's fantastic. Mickey, I'll take this offline with you later on, and I'm going to fool around with it first, because I'll be very honest, I've never embedded anything here. I've put in images and links and whatnot, but I've never done that. So let me do a little research. I'll get back to you. We'll talk.
Great. Fantastic. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you for your annotations as well.
Sure.
So, let me see. Under settings, I also just want to note that you as the instructor can decide whether or not you would like your students to be able to download the text. So if you want your students to be able to download it, print it off, take a look at it, work on it that way, you can do that as well. I also, for those of you who are concerned about or curious about the scoring, there is a hyperlink under scoring here that you can give to your students to explain more about how scoring works. Essentially, Perusall has a slider-based, you can see that this slider can change, a slider-based set of criteria that you can determine, for example, how many annotations there should be, quality level, delays in posting, late annotations, opening the assignment early, reading a certain target, etc. You can play around with any of these. And this might be something that you make available to students, screenshot, share, but it's certainly something for you to take a look at. I do recommend reading this section up here in blue, and also to look at this Learn More About Scoring and Perusall. It will tell you more about that. Okay, Steve, any other questions, or unmute yourself and just anyone feel free to ask.
There was a question I answered. I just want to make sure I answered it correctly. It had to do with the students can access readings through documents and through assignments. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Other people's comments are helpful but can be distracting. Is it possible to read and display the text comment-free? Can I turn off all the comments when I first come to the document?
Brilliant question, and one that I should have answered myself without that. Yes. So when I am looking at a document, you'll notice up here there is this option for all comments. As an instructor, I have a few more choices than students have here, but I can look at it in the document in a variety of different ways. When I introduce Perusall in student classes, and I'm certainly willing to come into any of your classes and introduce Perusall to your class, it takes me 10 or 15 minutes or so to do that. One of the things I always tell students is I actually don't like reading texts that have been pre-annotated, because I want to engage with the author, with the argument that she or he is making by myself first, to formulate, or at least roughly formulate, my responses to that text, and then see what other people are saying. So I can view it using no comments down here, but you'll note that I could look at, for example, just the questions, unanswered questions, a particular student, a group, for example, group A or group B or group C, for example. I can slice or dice this in a whole host of different ways.
And so, just to jump in, this functionality is available for students as well?
Yes, the students will not necessarily see a specific group or a specific student. That is just for the instructor.
Thank you.
Well, what's the learning curve for the student? How much time is going to take up in class time to get the students comfortable using this?
I really have not found that students have trouble with this. The main issues are sometimes students are toggling between annotate or not toggling between annotate figure and annotate text. The problem is if instructors have particularly photocopied or older scans of documents, and those scans may be cocked, or you're seeing that central crease or something like that. In that case, Perusall will not OCR the text successfully, and it will say, I have no idea what's on this page. I'm going to treat it like an image. And in that case, the students would need to use annotate figure and draw a box around a chunk of text, as opposed to using annotate text where you highlight A's and B's and C's and D's.
Hey, Shawn, can you talk a little bit about the chats and hashtags menus on the left side?
Yes. If I write here, my annotation is great, comment by, and I use the @ symbol, I immediately have access to the list of students who are in the class, and I can, call out, Jane or Shaniqua or Mary or Timmy or whatever the case may be. So it's a way to thank or to praise various members of my class. So let me just go down here. I'm going to highlight that part. And here, and I could go through a list. If I do an A, I could highlight the students that are engaged. The hashtag is used if you as a class or you as an instructor want to address or have your students address certain themes either in a particular text or themes over a particular course. So, for example, one theme might be division. Another theme might be blood. Another theme might be propaganda. Another theme might be the urban environment, for example. And if these themes are important to your class and you want them to think about those themes during reading, then when they encounter one of those themes, they can use the hashtag in order to highlight, this is a theme of lecture or a theme of trust, for example, and those become course or reading themes.
Neat. So if I have 3 documents per week in a seminar, can I make one of those required and ask the students to select one from the other 2?
I don't believe you can make a group of 3 such that the students can choose which 2 of the 3 is optional. However, when you are creating assignments, if I am going to create, let me go to this, and if I'm going to create an assignment out of this, one of the options that I'm given in this is to make the assignment optional, okay? And that is this checkbox that's down here. So you can make assignments optional, but I don't believe in Perusall you can give students a palette that they could choose just 3.
Thanks, Shawn. And there's one more text question, and then I'm going to take sort of open the microphone because there are some raised hands. But this question has to do with accessibility and optical character recognition. So is Perusall an accessible environment?
So Perusall is a fantastically accessible environment. The way in which I often think of it is it takes relatively inaccessible documents like PDFs and it optically character recognizes them to make them accessible. You may have noticed up here this keyboard icon that is at the top of the screen. This is a series of keystroke shortcuts that people with mobility issues can use in order to go through a particular text. Also, if you are in an assignment, you may have noticed this icon in the bottom right-hand corner, which is Read Aloud. And Perusall actually has a built-in screen reader that will read to a vision-impaired student what is going on the text. So rather than having to have a third-party tool, although admittedly most people in that situation often have it anyway, but nevertheless, it is built into Perusall so that text can be read to the students.
And I can zoom in, is that right, to make the text bigger?
Of course, yes.
Can
Let
you
me just
demonstrate that very quickly, if that's possible?
Sure. So
I think based on the questions, some of them are sort of idiosyncratic to people's particular browser and computer setup.
okay.
So what should people do, Shawn, if what they're seeing is a little different and they want a deeper dive in Perusall?
I think the best thing to do is just to reach out to me and I'll meet with you. So shill18@fordham.edu and we'll set up an appointment. You can also email me with your CRN of the courses you're interested in using Perusall in, and I can set that up for you. And lastly, if you want me to come into your physical or virtual class and introduce Perusall to your students, I'd be happy to do so. I will say I can and have done essentially 2 introductions to Perusall. One is a kind of just a tool talk where I would say, this is how you get to it, this is what you do, this is how it works, and I'm out of there. The other introduction to Perusall I can and have done is a more of a humanities focused introduction to annotation. And I like to use examples from Fordham University's special collections and other sources to try to show students the power of annotations, why humanists and others in the academy are very excited when they encounter annotations, and the role annotations can often play in the academic pursuit of trying to understand how a text was received by an individual or at a certain point in history. And many students coming into Fordham have been inculcated with a sort of don't write in books, and this kind of constant admonition that annotation is inherently bad. And yet for most of us, we know that certain annotations actually add value to text, and in some cases, incredible value, both financial and sometimes scholarly as well. So I like to bring examples from the special collections of texts that are annotated in the special collections and talk to students about how that annotation can inform us about how a text was received and the history of text and the reception of text.
Shawn, are these 2 presentations that you've mentioned available asynchronously, like in video form? And are there existing, simple student resources, videos, handouts, and so on that we can make available? And then I want to come to Susan because she's had her hand up for some time now.
Okay, certainly. If you go to perusall.com, as I just did here, and you click on support, what you can then get to is this page, which has instructor guides and instructor suggestions, as well as student guides and information for using Perusall. So a link to this page for students is something that you can send out to your students in advance, for example. To answer your earlier question, Steve, no, I have never been videoed in that or made a video in that way, but given where we are in terms of looking towards the fall, it's definitely on my to-do list for July and August.
You're muted. Shawn, you're muted. Stephen, you're muted.
Just calling on Susan to make her comment.
Okay. Well, that's me. Hi, everyone. Thank you. Thank you so much for this. And I am very intrigued by Perusall, but I had a lot of technical difficulties, a lot of them. And I'm going to contact you separately, Shawn. But I wanted to ask this question. A colleague of mine said that last semester what he did was he simply put readings he wanted people to read asynchronously in a Google Doc, a shared Google Doc folder. And the students were able to comment on it, they were able to annotate the text, and they were able to respond to each other's comments. And then he was able to print that out in advance and use that. It seems to me that the main advantage of Perusall is the data collection. I'm not clear on why, if you don't want that kind of thing, one wouldn't simply do what my colleague did. And I have another question, and that is, it seems, if I'm hearing you correctly, Perusall already has built into it the mechanism that determines a student's score for a comment. You can, if you want, override that. But unless you override that, Perusall decides. That's my second question, and it's less important to me than the first. Thank you for letting me talk.
Yeah, no problem. I completely agree. If Google Docs works for you, I would highly recommend it as well. It's a great way for students to add annotations onto a particular document. Perusall has a few features in addition to the analytics, has a few features that make it superior to using Google Docs, but it is debatable whether or not it's worth it compared to Google Docs. Google Docs is a great way to go. You just have to convert or take your document, put it there, allow all of your students to be commentators, and they can annotate. And that works well as well.
Does it have the same accessibility features, Google Docs?
Google Docs is very good. Those annotations, those comments, they're comments really, can be downloaded by the instructor. They're text-based. Yeah, it's pretty good.
So could we perhaps have a class on that? I mean, it seems partly that that Perusall and VoiceStart are the ones that are being pushed, and I recognize the value of them, but I wouldn't mind a class on something simpler like that for those of us who aren't interested in all this collection.
I think that's perfectly reasonable, and Steve and I can talk afterwards, and we'll figure something out.
Yeah. Just a couple of things. I want to. So, Shawn, when I was talking about accessibility, you mentioned that Perusall is a really accessible environment. Does Google Docs offer those same features of accessibility? Not in terms of like being able to download and print things.
No, you would have to have your third-party screen reader in order to be able to read the text. Yes.
Yep. Someone else had a hand raised. I think it was.
I think David did.
Yep. Sure. Please ask your question.
The question this is actually in response to Susan's point about using Google Docs. And yeah, I agree with her I'm a little concerned about the Perusall data collection. The problem with Google Docs is that you have to convert any document you have into a Word or a doc or a Google Docs format, and then you can use it really easily with comment and suggestions, and that's really good. The trick is finding the system or finding the software that will convert it. For example, I have Creative Suite, and it has Acrobat DC on it. Acrobat DC will convert most texts that I would be using for my students into a Google Docs format, but it takes a long time. Once it happens, you can use it. But I have to say that Creative Suite ain't cheap either. So that's something for us to talk about going forward, I would imagine.
Thank you.
Shawn, someone asked if we were done screen sharing. Would you, people I guess want to be able to see each other.
Oh, okay. Yes, of course.
And also, can you speak to the data collection and sharing habits of Google?
No. But the great thing, I mean,
Without
the other thing to say is that the Fordham University licensing agreement with Google is largely predicated on not permitting the data mining of the information that our students have. That's not true for all applications, but for what is called the core application. You may have noticed the ads that you see when you go to YouTube, for example, even within the Fordham ecosystem, but you don't see those in other aspects of Google. So, and that's part of the reason why in instructional technology, we're often very sort of concerned when faculty use third-party tools that have absolutely no relationship to the university in terms of data retention, FERPA concerns, and student content in general.
Any other questions? We're coming up. It's actually 4 o'clock now, so the session is officially over. I want to thank Shawn really so much for volunteering your time today and walking us through Perusall, and for all of you for attending the session.